Twilight cast long shadows as two fishermen, Old Tom and Henry, stood on the creaking pier. Beyond them, the sea churned with an otherworldly glow. Old Tom was a man of 60, his skin as leathery as the nets he handled. Henry, younger but equally haggard, had a perpetual frown that deepened with each haul of his net. Old Tom hauled up a battered lobster trap. When he peered inside, he found the lobsters coated in a slimy phosphorescent substance that pulsed faintly green. Henry approached, noticing how the pallid, wriggling parasites clung to the shells. They had seen many foul catches in their time, but never anything quite like this. Henry carefully prodded one of the parasites with a knife. The creature squirmed, revealing tiny barbed hooks at one end. Old Tom remembered rumors swirling around town: discolored fish, an odd taste to the seafood, and a creeping illness among the local fishermen. As a sudden gust of wind rattled the dock, the men exchanged uneasy glances. Each wondered if the other knew how to stop this scourge before it spread inland. Morning light found Dr. O'Neill pacing inside Blackmoor Bay's modest clinic. A small crowd of fishermen sat in the waiting area, each with high fevers and a persistent itch crawling beneath their skin. Tube, a faint greenish shimmer twisted among the red. The doctor's concern deepened as she studied the sample under a microscope. The parasites were not merely present in the bloodstream, they were actively altering Stan's cells, merging them with an unknown sequence. She kept her findings vague when speaking to the patients, but fear clawed at her composure. Beneath the mundane routine of checkups and lab tests, she sensed something far more malevolent stirring. A nurse rushed in, reporting 4 new arrivals. Each claimed to have seen a green slick on the water near the pier, and each exhibited similar fevers and that terrible itching sensation in their arms or legs. Dr. O'Neill thought of contacting larger hospitals, but she worried the outbreak would escalate before help arrived. The infection rate, from all appearances, was accelerating. Meanwhile, Stan quietly rubbed his arm. A cold sweat beaded at his brow. Determined to find the source, Old Tom and Henry ventured out on their fishing boat at dawn. The sea was unusually calm, an eerie quiet enveloping them. The men lowered a weighted net into the depths. When they pulled it up, the net came alive with twisting shapes, fish riddled with translucent parasites. One parasite, nearly the size of a man's thumb, dropped onto the deck. Its pale, gelatinous form quivered, then launched itself toward Henry's boot. Henry let out a startled shout, kicking it away. The creature landed with a wet slap, leaving a smear of greenish fluid on the deck. The men exchanged horrified glances. If these parasites could move on land, even briefly, the contamination risk was higher than they had imagined. As they returned to shore, an unspoken dread weighed on them, realizing these creatures might spread beyond the water's edge. Over the next week, whispers of illness grew into panicked rumors. Feverish residents stumbled across sidewalks, skin clammy and eyes reflecting an uncanny glimmer of green in the dim light. Families huddled in their homes, trying to protect loved ones who thrashed in bed, mumbling about the sea calling to them in their dreams. News reporters arrived to film the deteriorating situation. They captured alarming footage. Lumps beneath the skin on victims' arms and legs, shifting as if alive. Those lumps in some cases burst into grotesque lesions, leaking a fluid brimming with embryonic parasites. Even the local animals were not spared. Dogs and cats prowled alleys, their eyes milky white, likely infested. The entire town seemed on the brink of succumbing to a living nightmare. Back at the clinic, Dr. O'Neill's staff was overwhelmed. Leo, a young fisherman who entered the clinic looking gaunt and delirious. His complexion had dulled and his body shook with violent chills. Dr. O'Neill, noticing the lumps beneath his shirt, ushered him into an examination room. Suddenly, Leo convulsed, arching his back. A large, fleshy protrusion tore through his abdomen, revealing a cluster of writhing appendages. It looked like a nest of serpents, slick and greenish black. A harrowing scream echoed off the clinic walls. The doctor backed away, stifling her own horror. Attempting to help, she reached for medical instruments, but the mass slithered back under Leo's skin, leaving him gasping in agony. Realizing she was unprepared for such transformations, Dr. O'Neill felt panic weigh on her conscience. She had no time to process her shock as another call rang through the clinic, reporting another violent outbreak. Night fell over Blackmoor Bay. By candlelight, a small group of survivors convened in an old church, now a makeshift sanctuary. Old Tom, Henry, Dr. O'Neill, and a handful of frightened townspeople discussed what to do next. Old Tom insisted they must flee. Henry worried that leaving would only spread the infection. Dr. O'Neill proposed trying to contain the parasites at the source, the ocean. Some prayed, while others fought the urge to panic. They knew time was against them. Outside, moans echoed through the streets, accompanied by the slithering sounds of parasites creeping across doorsteps. Under cover of darkness, Henry and Dr. O'Neill gathered chemicals designed to neutralize biological hazards. They planned to pour these into the bay, hoping to kill the parasites at their breeding ground. As they poured the chemicals into the water, something massive disturbed the surface. It emerged slowly, a writhing abomination composed of countless human bodies fused by the parasites. The deformed faces of men and women gaped in silent torment, their eyes glowing with parasitic luminescence. Henry froze at the sight, dropping his canister. Dr. O'Neill fought the urge to scream but mustered her courage, hurling the remaining chemicals onto the monstrosity. The creature let out a haunting wail, a chorus of tortured voices in unison. In retaliation, smaller parasites erupted from the sand around Dr. O'Neill and Henry, latching onto their legs. Despite their best efforts, the tendrils coiled tight, dragging them toward the water. Overwhelmed, they vanished beneath the slithering mass. As dawn broke, the fog lifted to reveal a devastated town. Smoke drifted from burnt buildings. Entire streets were deserted. Those who survived hid in whatever safe corners remained, but even they bore the telltale lumps and glimmers of infection. The ocean lapped at the shore, still stained with the greenish slick. Inside the old church, a single flickering candle illuminated rows of pews filled with silent, motionless figures. At first glance, they might have been asleep. On closer inspection, each person's body displayed advanced parasitic growths. Distended limbs, hollow eyes, flesh parted by sinewy alien tissue. Blackmoor Bay had fallen to the Shivering Siege. In the idyllic valley town of Deerfield, life revolved around the natural world. Surrounded by rolling hills and abundant farmland, it seemed like the last place on Earth for a nightmare to unfold. Farmers prided themselves on sustainable practices. Tourists admired the vibrant wildflowers and fresh produce. Yet hidden beneath the fertile soil lurked a foreign spore, an invasive fungus that would soon blossom into a horrifying parasite, preying upon plants, animals, and even humans, initially masked by the cheerful bustle of everyday life. Early morning sunlight streamed across Lily's farm, the largest in Deerfield. Lily, a dedicated organic farmer, stepped into her greenhouse. She immediately noticed something unusual. Clusters of bright purple fungus coating the stems of her tomato plants. Curious, she gently touched one with a gloved hand. The fungus quivered, leaving a faint dusting of purple spores on her glove. Lily dismissed it as a strange mold, unaware of the threat it posed. She resumed her tasks, watering, checking soil pH, trimming leaves, until a farmhand summoned her, saying the same purple fungus had invaded the other side of the greenhouse, as she witnessed entire rows of seedlings overtaken by these alien spores. That evening, Lily drove her pickup to the Deerfield Community Center for the monthly farmers' meeting. The typical camaraderie and chatter were replaced by hushed tones of concern. Several farmers reported similar fungal invasions. The county agricultural officer stepped to the front. He explained that samples were being sent to the state lab, but no known fungus matched this variety. He warned everyone to quarantine their infected areas. She admitted to the group that the fungus had spread rapidly in just a week and now threatened to consume her entire greenhouse. Though she tried not to show it, a prickly dread welled inside her, especially when she felt a slight itch on her wrist. By the next day, Lily noticed a small rash on her wrist. Tiny purple specks dotted the irritated skin. She recalled the torn glove from earlier and wondered if the spores had made contact with her flesh. Despite her growing alarm, she carried on with her work, attributing the rash to a mild allergic reaction. Over the next few days, the rash evolved into a patch of small buds. They seemed to open slightly in sunlight, releasing tiny flecks of purple dust. She wore long sleeves, doused the rash in ointments, but the buds persisted, nearly blooming under her skin. A gnawing terror crept into her thoughts. This was no ordinary infection. Across Deerfield, more residents showed similar symptoms. People in the clinic complaining of purple welts and a persistent, sickly sweet odor clinging to their clothes. Fungus-laced dust drifting across market stalls, causing sneezing fits and coughing. Dr. Patel, the town's doctor, studied the spores under a microscope. She observed that the fungus merged seamlessly with human cells, warping them into plant-like structures. When questioned by alarmed townsfolk, she confessed they were dealing with an aggressive parasitic fungus that fed on living tissue. Shopkeepers closed early, families locked their doors, and the once cheerful Deerfield Farmers Market grew deserted. As night fell, Lily locked herself in her bedroom, dreading what she would see in the mirror. Purple flower-like protrusions now adorned her forearms, each petal pulsing in rhythm with her heartbeat. Whenever she breathed, a faint purple mist escaped her mouth and nostrils. She tried to sleep, but vivid nightmares plagued her. In them, she stood in her greenhouse, her body rooted to the soil. The fungus consumed her slowly, extending leaves and vines from her limbs. She awoke in a panic, feeling the buds on her arms twitch as though responding to her fear. She pored over books on botany, scoured the internet for fungal infections, but found nothing resembling this horrifying, sentient bloom. Morning arrived with a grim hush over Deerfield. The farmer's market, ordinarily bustling, stood half empty. Still, some infected residents ventured out, hoping to replenish supplies. Others came out of denial or necessity, ignoring the agricultural officer's warnings. Infected shoppers coughed up purple spores, leaving trails of dust in the air. A few people collapsed near vegetable stalls. As frightened onlookers rushed to help, they too were exposed. Panic erupted. Witnessing neighbors recoiling from neighbors, some brandishing pitchforks or makeshift torches. The bonds that once held the community together frayed under the fungal onslaught. At the clinic, Dr. Patel worked frantically with a handful of volunteers. They tested antifungal treatments on tissue samples, but found the spores adapted too quickly. Stress lines etched Dr. Patel's face as she considered extreme measures. One volunteer suggested mixing industrial herbicides, typically forbidden around humans, with conventional antifungal drugs. With no better option, Dr. Patel resolved to attempt a desperate chemical cocktail. She knew these methods could harm the infected, but if they did nothing, the fungus would claim everyone. Under the pale, morning sky, Dr. Patel led a small team to Lily's farm, having tracked the densest growth. The greenhouse loomed ahead, windows clouded by purple spores. Inside, infected townspeople wandered in a trance, their bodies partially covered in iridescent blooms. The team wore improvised protective gear, modified gas masks, thick gloves, and coveralls. Each carried a sprayer filled with the experimental herbicide mixture. At the greenhouse's center stood Lily, rooted in place by coiling vines that sprouted from her shoulders and ribcage. Her eyes flickered with a strange mix of human fear and fungal intelligence. When she noticed the team, Lily spoke in a voice layered with echoing harmonics, urging them to embrace the new life the fungus offered. Dr. Patel, swallowing her horror, ordered the volunteers to spray. Purple spores erupted in a swirling storm, and vine-like tendrils lashed out, ensnaring one volunteer who screamed as fungal growths burst from his suit. Dr. Patel and the others directed a concentrated blast of chemicals onto Lily, who shrieked, a sound that merged agony with the rustle of thousands of leaves. The herbicide scorched her vines and forced the buds to wither. Purple petals fell like dying embers. She collapsed to the greenhouse floor, gasping as the fungus retreated within her flesh. For a moment, Lily's eyes held recognition. She tried to speak, but only a hoarse whisper escaped. Dr. Patel knelt beside her, softly reassuring Lily that it was over. But the spores fought back, forming a noxious cloud around the remaining volunteers. People choked, stumbling outside for fresh air. One by one, the infected collapsed as the fungus within them shriveled. Some died, unable to endure the toxic purge. A week later, Deerfield resembled a ghost town. Government quarantine teams roamed the area in hazmat suits, incinerating any remaining fungal growth. Survivors gathered in the community center, mourning lost friends and family. Dr. Patel remained behind to oversee final containment efforts. She believed the fungus might resurge if even a single spore survived. Lily's greenhouse, once filled with lush greenery, now lay in ruins. Patches of blackened stalks and dried purple remnants hinted at the chaos that had unfurled there. The region stabilized, but a sense of sorrow lingered. Deerfield would never again be the same. Late at night, a wind would still carry a faint purple dust, and some residents swore they heard the whisper of petals brushing against glass. In a remote desert plateau stood an imposing research facility known only by the codename Project Aurora. From the outside, it appeared as a cluster of sleek buildings surrounded by electrified fences and guard towers. Inside, however, cutting-edge scientists delved into experiments involving extraterrestrial samples brought back from meteorite crash sites. Through powerful microscopes, they observed alien microbes, each teeming with possibilities. Some believed the research could revolutionize medicine. Others whispered that a darker purpose, perhaps biological warfare, lay behind the lab's locked doors, bearing witness to secrets that would soon erupt into a horrifying calamity. Late one night, Dr. Adrienne Morgan, Project Aurora's lead researcher, studied a chunk of meteorite locked behind bulletproof glass. A gelatinous substance oozed from its core, glowing faintly under UV light. Dr. Morgan's excitement was palpable. She believed this microbe might hold the key to regenerative medicine. She meticulously recorded her findings. The alien cells exhibited robust growth when combined with human stem cells. Adrenaline coursed through her veins as she imagined healing spinal injuries or regrowing lost limbs. In a neighboring containment chamber, a group of lab mice had been injected with the experimental serum derived from the alien cells. One had regrown a severed tail with glowing green veins coursing through it. Major Reynolds, head of facility security, watched from a control room. He had a soldier's intuition for danger and found this unnatural transformation deeply unsettling. Dr. Morgan, however, dismissed his concerns, insisting that these breakthroughs would save countless lives. But when a camera feed revealed the mice gnawing through metal bars and attacking each other in a frenzy, a ripple of unease spread through the entire lab staff. The scientists scrambled to recapture the escaped subjects, some of which showed glowing eyes and unnerving aggression. Despite the incident with the mice, the project proceeded to a closely guarded human trial. Evan, a volunteer with a debilitating spinal injury, was chosen. Dr. Morgan injected him with a refined version of the alien serum. Within days, Evan reported feeling sensations in limbs once paralyzed. He stood, shaky at first, but soon moved with a grace that surpassed his pre-injury state. At night, however, he complained of splitting headaches and unstoppable muscle spasms. He describes the lumps that formed along Evan's spine, each one pulsating with alien energy. Dr. Morgan observed these changes with a mix of awe and alarm. She wondered if the cells were pushing beyond mere healing, venturing into uncharted territory. Within a week, the corridors of Project Aurora buzzed with rumors of staff members experiencing strange symptoms. Elevated temperatures, sudden bouts of disorientation, and inexplicable lumps beneath their skin. Major Reynolds doubled security measures, but it was too late. Lab's dimly lit hallways, capturing glimpses of terrified scientists collapsing. Emergency lights flashed red. A computerized voice announced containment failures in multiple sectors. Alien microbes seemed to have infiltrated the facility's ventilation system, reaching unsuspecting employees. Dr. Shaw, a colleague of Dr. Morgan, stumbled into a corridor with a bulge throbbing in her neck. Before horrified onlookers could react, tendrils burst through her lab coat, blending her flesh with an unidentifiable mass. She gasped for air, her eyes turning a glowing green, then fell still as the parasitic growth engulfed her completely. From security footage, these horrifying transformations. Some infected developed elongated limbs and crawled along walls or ceilings like giant insects. Others sprouted large sacs on their chests, throbbing with embryonic alien life. These mutated hosts attacked any uninfected humans they encountered, spreading alien cells through vicious wounds or the release of airborne spores. Major Reynolds assembled a squad of guards, each heavily armed and outfitted in partial hazmat suits. Their mission was clear: prevent the creatures from escaping the facility. Barricaded in her private lab, Dr. Morgan pored over secret documents. Through these files, she learned Project Aurora had always intended to militarize the alien microbes. The higher-ups viewed regenerative medicine as a stepping stone toward engineering an unstoppable biological weapon. She cursed herself for not seeing it sooner. All her idealistic dreams of medical breakthroughs had blinded her to the moral depths of the research. Now the facility was overrun, and dozens of her colleagues suffered unspeakable fates. Her guilt deepened as she watched Evan's condition via surveillance camera. He had grown monstrous, caged in a specialized tank. The lumps on his spine had cracked open, revealing luminous vertebrae wrapped in alien tissue. Major Reynolds and his security detail fought their way into the sublevels where they discovered a hatchery. Row upon row of large glass tanks, each containing embryonic forms twisted by alien human genetics. Evan, among them, slammed his twisted hand against the glass from inside his tank. Cracks formed, green fluid seeping through as the creature inside raged. Elsewhere, unrecognizable hybrids twitched in stasis. Some had multiple sets of teeth, others boasted tendrils that floated in the tank's solution like underwater plants. The entire sublevel reeked of decaying flesh and chemical disinfectants. Realizing the infection would soon breach the facility walls, Major Reynolds decided to activate the self-destruct protocol. He and Dr. Morgan converged at the reactor chamber, weaving around grotesque creatures feeding on half-transformed bodies. Dr. Morgan, tears in her eyes, apologized to him for her role in the tragedy. He, grim but resolute, insisted they had no choice but to destroy everything. The reactor chamber's control panel glowed under the flickering emergency lights. With trembling hands, Dr. Morgan input the sequence. A computerized voice began counting down from 5 minutes. The hallway leading to the surface elevator became a battleground. Infected researchers and soldier-turned creatures launched themselves at the fleeing group. The guards fired round after round. Some of the creatures, riddled with bullets, refused to die until vital alien organs were obliterated. Major Reynolds was struck by a slashing tendril, piercing his leg. He shouted for Dr. Morgan to leave him behind. She hesitated, tears running down her face, but he insisted, pressing a pistol into her hand. She forced herself onward, every second counting down to the facility's fiery end. With seconds remaining, Dr. Morgan reached the elevator. One creature lunged from above, hooking its elongated fingers onto the elevator's frame. Dr. Morgan fired the pistol, the muzzle flash illuminating the abomination's blank, green-lit eyes. It fell away with a blood-curdling shriek, allowing the doors to slam shut. As the elevator ascended, rumbling explosions rocked the facility. The overhead lights flickered, and the computerized voice fell silent, replaced by the roar of collapsing infrastructure. Dr. Morgan held her breath, bracing for the entire shaft to fail. But the elevator emerged onto the desert plateau, opening to a harsh sun and swirling dust. Follows Dr. Morgan as she staggered away just in time to see a massive fireball erupt from the facility's subterranean levels. Steel, concrete, and alien matter were vaporized in an instant, leaving only a charred crater. A rescue helicopter descended moments later. Hazmat teams surrounded Dr. Morgan, securing her in a containment vehicle. She stared blankly as medics scanned her vitals. Unknown to them, the infection monitor on her wrist blinked red. Within her bloodstream, a single alien cell had taken hold, resilient even after the destruction. Project Aurora had been physically annihilated, but the alien organism lived on, hidden within the last survivor. Despite best intentions, mankind's quest for knowledge had birthed a parasite beyond comprehension, one that would soon seek new ways to propagate itself.